We have a great text to consider this morning. Micah doesn't usually get much airtime in sermons, except for the second half of the last verse of our reading today, that second half of verse 8. Some of you have probably heard this text before and may even know it by heart. It was the theme of a Church of the Brethren annual conference, and as you have heard, it's been the basis of song lyrics. It's been called the golden text of the Old Testament. If you remember, in October, I asked you to come up with a slogan, something short that would describe who you are and what you believe, something that you could put on a yard sign or a bumper sticker. Now, I don't know if Jews 800 years before Christ was born had bumper stickers or not. Traffic moved a lot slower then, I'm pretty sure. But if they did, it might have read something like this: do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. This kind of sums up our ethics as people of faith in 3 neat little clauses. And that, suggests theologian Andrew Foster Connors, is what makes this passage dangerous. Not because of what it says, but because of our tendency to turn it into a slogan rather than a way of life. We've been talking in the past 3 weeks about the journey of Epiphany, the journey which happened to the wise men, but which also happens to each one of us when we seek Jesus and find that Christ is King, when we make decisions to leave home, to follow Jesus, and to grow into discipleship and maturity. Whatever our circumstances, whoever we are, there are some common things about that journey. We know it isn't going to be a straight line. It isn't going to be easy. There will be things that we will have to give up along the way, and we're going to get off that path. This passage from Micah chapter 6 is about what God does when we're lost and what we can do to get back on track. Micah is one of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. Minor because he wrote less material than the heavy hitters like Jeremiah and Isaiah, not because he's playing in a different league. Prophets functioned as the mouthpiece of God, men and women who shared God's words with the people. And this usually meant that they were unpopular, because as I mentioned before, people have a way of getting off track, of being lost, of ignoring God's words. And not just people, singular, but peoples, plural, whole nations. In Micah 6, verses 1 to 8, God has an issue with the people of Israel. And God says, we're going to have to work this out. Micah sets up sort of a courtroom dialogue where God asks the people questions, the people have questions of their own, and God responds. I'm going to set this up for you because this is very important context for Micah, for the beginning of those first verses. If you have a Bible with you, I encourage you to follow along, but I warn you, I'm going to be paraphrasing freely. The narrator, Micah, begins by saying to the people of Israel, you need to stand up and make your case because God has an issue with you, and God says you are going to have to work this out. So God comes to the stand and says, what have I done to you? Are you tired of me? Now, these are rhetorical questions. That means questions that you don't need to answer because the answer is obvious. And it is not just God the Father who asks questions like this. Human parents do too. So here's a tip, kids. If your mom or dad or any of the rest of you, your spouse, says to you, what have I done to you? Are you tired of me? Do not answer that question. That conversation is not going to end well. Because it is obvious that God has done nothing except protect and save the people. And like human parents, even though the people know this, God goes on to tell them anyway. How God brought them out of slavery in Egypt, sent them leaders and prophets, and kept the prophet Balaam from cursing them when they were camped on the River Jordan preparing to enter the promised land. That story is in Numbers chapter 22, and there's a donkey involved. So, God lists these things, and the people answer back with some rhetorical questions of their own. So, what do you expect us to do? Give up our entire allowance? Sit at home every night? Cut off our right arms? Are you kidding me? The people shoot right back with a list of exaggerated demands, things that God never asked or expected them to do. Oh, so now we're supposed to come up with 1,000 rams or 10,000 rivers of oil or sacrifice our firstborn children. And God answers, spare me the drama. You know what you're supposed to do. Set up systems that are fair to everyone. Be kind to other people. Stay on this journey with me. I had a professor at AMBS, the seminary just up the road, who had this quote in his office. I don't know if you can read it. God tends to talk in black letter. It says, I will not accept your bull. I don't know if this quotation came from this passage. The sentiment, if not those specific words, is certainly here. You can find it throughout the Old Testament prophets, right up through the parables of Jesus in the New Testament. God doesn't want our bull. Our excuses, our justifications, our assurances about the next time, our assurances, our extravagant promises, our public display of remorse. That is not the kind of offering that is acceptable to God. Who do we think we're kidding? God knows what's in our hearts already. God knows the evil we have done, as well as the good that we have neglected to do. God knows the ways that we have stumbled off the path and gotten lost. And God knows what we need to do to get back on track. And God will not accept our bull. Stop talking the talk and start walking the walk. I affirm that there is a place for our words. We need to acknowledge to God and to ourselves when we have gotten off the path. We need to acknowledge to other people when we have acted in ways that are mean-spirited or even vicious. We even need to acknowledge when we have participated in systems, even systems that we did not set up, that have privileged us at the cost of other people. This acknowledgement is called confession. And straying off of God's path is called sin. But it's a mistake to think that the only thing that we need to do to address our sin is to confess. And the more dramatic we make that, the better. God doesn't want that bull. No, in order to make amends and move beyond our sin, we actually have to get back on the path and start walking with God. We need to support systems that are fair to everyone. We need to be kind to other people. It's our actions, not our words, which speak the loudest about who we are. And that's why it's so important that we don't just turn this passage into a slogan, a bumper sticker to put on our car while we cut people off in traffic. Quoting slogans which don't match the way we live give Christians a bad name. And quoting God's words without making an effort to live by them dishonors the name of God. God will not accept that bull. There are other places in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, where we find rules about how to live. Often, like the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, they're phrased negatively. Don't have other gods, don't take the name of the Lord in vain, don't steal, don't lie. These commandments are important to govern our relationship with God and our relationships with other people. But we cannot offer God the things we don't do. We can't even offer God the things we ought to do, but just haven't gotten around to yet. What God desires from us is sincerity. Sincere desire to walk with God, sincere acknowledgement when we stumble off course, and sincere action. Action of justice and loving kindness. A sincere commitment to treat others the way we want to be treated. To love our neighbors as ourselves. And to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. That sincere desire and that sincere action is what is acceptable to God. It is the best offering we can make. And it is the offering from which all other offerings come. Our praise, our prayers, our planning, our money. If they do not come from a sincere desire to work for justice and to treat others with kindness and to walk with God, then we're just showing off or going through the motions. And God will not accept that bull. Now, maybe we can fool or mislead other people at least for a while, but God knows what's in our hearts. Here's the other side of that equation. When we're motivated by a sincere desire to treat others fairly and be kind to one another and walk with God, we can't help but offer our praise and our prayers and our planning and our money. Whatever offering we make, however simple, however quiet, however modest, is acceptable to God. Because God knows what's in our hearts. We are the offering. Our sincere desire, our confession, our action, which is acceptable to God. And each one of us is worth more than 1,000 rams or 10,000 rivers of oil. No bull. So, brothers and sisters, I encourage you to stay on the path. Keep listening, keep praying, keep striving to walk with God. Help others who are struggling along the way. Be sincere when things are going well, and especially be sincere when they're going badly. God will not accept our bull, but any offering, no matter what it is acceptable to God when given with a sincere heart. For what does the Lord require of us but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God? Amen.